I don't count the 2 episodes from the summer of 2013, although those are numbered 1 and 2, but
Okay.
those were not good episodes. For those that are watching now or later, don't watch the first 2 episodes of this program. They're not that good. I'll just say the first episode was supposed to be talking about weather. It then delved into sports.
Oh, okay.
And that didn't go over well. So, but pretty much every Friday since mid-March, a couple of times we've had to cancel either because of computer issues, having no guests, holidays, because we didn't do a show after Christmas, the Friday after Christmas. We did one after Thanksgiving, which we weren't going to do, but we did anyway. We didn't do one the 4th of July because the 4th of July fell on a Friday last year. So, but yeah, our 1-year anniversary show is in 2 months.
Oh, wow.
You
got a big guest lined up for that?
No. I have a guest next week. I don't have any for the next 3 weeks after that, and then I have 2 more after that, and then I have one on the weekend of Palm Sunday, which is the end of March. And I'm thinking, oh great. And I'm thinking I need to start scheduling better. I used to be able to, and since everybody is hearing this, that I could schedule. I would email somebody and say May, and would be able to schedule them in July, like 2 months later. Now I'm having to schedule people like 2 weeks later. So,
Wow.
I mean, we've had several shows that had no guests, but we had topics. So, But anyway, since it's after 7, for those watching now or later on, this is Polygon Issuance number 42. It's the middle of January 2015, the 16th, and right now outside, it's not like it was last Friday. Last Friday I complained it was too cold. Well, now it's warm and the snow's all melting. And I'll say this, last week on Wednesday, it was a week ago Wednesday, the temperature didn't even crack 0 all day. And then last Friday, the high last Friday I think was 4. And it was horrible because I had to go and take my parents' car in to get an oil change. And it was so brutally cold. And then this Friday, it's wonderful. It's in the 30s, well, it was here. But in southwestern Iowa, it was in the 60s. So I'm jealous. So, and I did not forecast that well. I only forecasted low to mid-50s. And I keep getting burned by western Iowa. Don't know what it is, but it just seems like they get rid of the snow so fast, and then it just warms up because their dew points were down in the 20s. It was in the 20s. Dew points were in the 20s all over the state, but it seems like just there it just warms up so fast. So, it drives me nuts. But we barely got to 40 today. So. But down where our guest is, Lisa Spencer, who's the chief meteorologist at WSMV in Nashville, she had warmer temperatures, except she didn't have the 60s.
No, not quite the 60s. It was 55 today. So that was pretty good. Pretty good. It was definitely improvement. We've been talking about it for days and days and days, how it would warm up. So it was good to have 55 and then about 56 or so tomorrow.
And it's kind of funny that given the fact that your station is owned by a company that is based in Iowa.
Yes.
Des Moines had a warmer temperature than Nashville. They were 58.
Yeah, right. Wow. Yeah, we are, WSMV is owned by Meredith Corporation, which most people know Meredith as owning Better Homes and Gardens, so it's a big publishing company, but they have a lot of TV stations too.
Yeah. And the funny thing about it is, and this is going off topic, that Meredith doesn't own any stations in Iowa, which is kind of odd. But that they do a good job. A lot of their stations that they have, they bought some more. So there's a lot of good companies out there that do things well.
And I will say, Meredith is a great company to work for. I mean, it really, really, really is. I mean, I've heard horror stories from other folks, so it's a good TV company to work for.
And I think it depends on, it's a station-by-station basis. that some stations might not be as good as others. I mean, you kind of have to go with the flow, and in that case, so. But anyway, that's not what we were going to discuss. We're not discussing the company, and we don't want Lisa getting in trouble with the president of the company, because we want her to keep her job. So
that would be nice. Nice.
So anyway, I had thought of you on, and I mentioned this in the email, that we have had so many former Weather Channel people on over, in fact, last week, in fact, Tony Minolfi, who worked at the Weather Channel, was on last week. We've had so many of them, and I somewhat remembered you from the Weather Channel once in a while. But I don't want to go into that yet. I want to go back to the beginning, back to your growing up in Jackson, Tennessee, which seems to be, from in the last 20 years, tornado capital of Tennessee.
I would agree with that. In about a 15-year span, they had 3 tornadoes. And the interesting thing about that is the first 2 that came through were within a mile of my parents' home, or the home where I grew up. And then my parents moved to the north side of town, and the last tornado to come through came within a mile of their new home. So I don't know what's going on there, but they've had quite a few tornadoes. And
the last one you speak of was the super outbreak in 08.
Yes.
Outbreak.
Yeah, that's right.
It hit Union University and up in that area.
Right, and Union is very near where my parents are now, so they had a lot of damage to dorms and also to the city itself. There was damage. Yeah,
because I'll say this, because my mother has been to Jackson, Tennessee. There's a story beyond that, but that's we'll be here all night. But
okay.
I'll condense it down. Okay, my mother went down to Memphis, where her half-sister lives. Well, my mother's cousin lives in Kingston Springs, just outside Nashville. So they met halfway in Jackson, Tennessee. So there's your condensed version.
Okay.
So, but so was there any type of, growing up there, did you have like an interest? Was weather an interest at the time, or was that kind of later on?
It really came later on. I was always interested in broadcasting. I grew up participating in 4-H, and a lot of people who live in rural communities are really familiar with 4-H. You probably have 4-H club there in Iowa. Yeah. And I was in 4-H and did a lot of the public speaking events, and I knew I wanted to be in broadcasting, which is a little different way of getting into this than other people. So I went on with my plans to be in radio first, and then eventually into television. And so while I was in college, I went to the University of Memphis, which was Memphis State University at the time. I went on an internship at WMC, which is the NBC station in Memphis, and that's where I got my interest in weather, was through this internship. So I always tell people, you know, when you're trying to decide what you want to do when you're in high school or when you're in college, be sure you take advantage of all the internships and shadow days, because you might find something that you didn't realize you would even be interested in. But that's how I got my interest in weather and said, hey, this is really cool. I want to try this. But obviously knowing that I needed to know something about weather if I was going to talk about weather. And then I made my way over to the geography department at the University of Memphis, and they had an atmospheric science program. And I finished up my broadcasting degree and then went right into a master's in their geography department. And the rest is history. So that's when I started studying weather and ended up getting my very first job right there in Memphis.
And that was at Channel 13, I think it was.
That's right, WHBQ, which was the ABC station at the time. And for anybody who's listening that knows anything about Memphis, that station at the time, their main meteorologist, their chief meteorologist, was Jim Jaggers. And he's the one that kind of helped me out, got me started, and ended up working the weekends for them there at WHBQ.
Was there any sort of historical type stuff that happened while you were in Memphis? Because you weren't there too long?
Not a real long period of time. Nothing really sticks out as any significant event that happened there. I mean, we would have severe thunderstorm events, but nothing tremendous, nothing really that historic while I was working on the air there.
So that would have been before. Was that before or after that horrible winter in the mid '80s? That Memphis just get a lot of snow.
Yeah, that was after
Okay.
that event. Yeah, that I started there.
And then after that, where did you end up? Because was that you went to the Weather Channel then?
Yeah, and I was really fortunate to start in a city as large as Memphis. That just usually doesn't happen. But I think it was a combination of my radio experience, so I already had a bit of an ad lib skill going, so that helped. And then I was taking classes with Jim, so I already knew him. And when they had that weekend opening, I just slid, right over, and he worked with me and got me ready to do the weekend job. So I really did. I was fortunate to get that job. But after I'd been there for a while, I knew Jim wasn't going anywhere. And if I wanted to advance my career and work something other than weekends, that I needed to start looking around. So I started sending out tapes. And one of the places I sent a tape because I saw a blurb, and I think it was in the back of Broadcasting Magazine, because, listen, back then you didn't have internet or any other ways of looking for a job. You're always looking in the back of Broadcast Magazine or some other type of industry publication. So I saw this job open for the Weather Channel. And I was familiar with the Weather Channel. It had just started. It had just come on our cable in Memphis maybe a couple of years before. And I sent them a tape. And I actually got a call back. And they said, you know what, we filled that opening with someone else. And that someone else happened to be Diane Barone. Anybody who's watched the Weather Channel for years may remember Diane. She was from Los Angeles. And so Diane got that job. But they said, hey, we're going to keep your tape and we'll let you know if we have anything else come up. Well, I thought that was your usual, yeah, right line. But about 6 months later, I got a call from them, said, can you send us a new tape? We've got another opening here at the Weather Channel. So I sent them a tape, and the next thing I know, I was loading everything up and moving to Atlanta. And that's how I got my start, and that was in 1991 when I first started working at the Weather Channel.
And you started on air immediately.
Yeah. I was working the evening shift. I always worked evenings when I worked at the Weather Channel.
So you were there for quite some time, and talk about your time at the Weather Channel. That was pretty much during what most people would consider the classical peak of the Weather Channel, the original Weather Channel time.
Right. Yeah, and no offense to what the Weather Channel does now or anyone who works there, but we really did weather all the time when I worked there. Now, occasionally you would get those little cooking spots that would pop up, but for the most part, we did weather all the time. And it was a great time to work there. John Hope was there, who many folks will remember was the hurricane guru at the Weather Channel. And he was just fantastic and a great mentor and someone great to learn from, because I had not lived in a tropical climate or anywhere that in the U.S. it was affected by tropical weather. So that wasn't something I was as familiar with. So it was great to learn from him. And then also, any folks who watched the Weather Channel a long time ago may remember this gem of a guy named Charlie Welsh, who worked there. And I don't think he was a meteorologist per se, but he had been doing weather for years, and he was great. So he was one of the folks that was working there when I was there. And we did do a lot of weather. There were a couple of huge events that well, more than a couple, but the one that most people will be familiar with was Hurricane Andrew struck Florida and Louisiana while I was at the Weather Channel, and that was a huge event. And then, and I'm sorry I can't remember the year, but there was we had massive flooding on the rivers in the Midwest.
93.
Yes. And just tremendous flooding there. That was another big event. And my one and only live shot that I got to do for the Weather Channel came in the mid-90s when there was a lot of flooding in California. And I can remember the town they sent me to was La Conchita, California. And I covered mudslides that was happening there. And that was my one and only time to do a live shot, because I did leave shortly thereafter. But those were some really big events. One really big event impacted Atlanta too, and that was, I also think, in '93, as I recall, the big ice event. Do you remember that? That big ice that went all the way down to Atlanta. I mean, paralyzed the city. Well, I had just had a baby at the time, and I was already back at work, but my little boy was just, I mean, he was pretty young then. So I ended up getting a pass and not trying to go into work because of him, because they were getting people to come in and stay at work for, you know, long periods of time. So I ended up missing out on a lot of the actual working of that event, but I was in Atlanta and employed by the Weather Channel when that was going on. But that was crazy. That ice storm was amazing, and I think that was '93 or '94. It was somewhere in there.
Yeah, because you could be kind of mixing the ice storm with the big snowstorm.
Yeah, it could be. I know it was a big ice event, though, that kind of parallelized everything. You know, after you cover weather for so long, Jeff, sometimes these events become a blur. Trying to remember which one was which year. But yeah, those were some of the biggies that happened while I was at the Weather Channel. I loved working at the Weather Channel. I was just I learned so much there, and it was really a great experience.
Now, of course, there's still not many people still there from when you were there, but
Right.
Of the people that were there at the time, were there any of them that you just enjoyed working with, besides the ones you already talked about?
Well, someone who is back again is Dave Schwartz. And Dave was just a delight to work with. He's just a fun person and a very caring person, and he was a lot of fun to work with. I enjoyed him. And also, Keith Westerledge was one of the first people that I worked with on the air. And Keith he ended up being in charge of all of the on-camera meteorologists, but he was a little bit of a prankster sometimes. And I can remember him doing his best to make me laugh while I'm on air, but he was a lot of fun to work with. There's so many. And I still stay in touch with Mike Seidel. Mike is just a great friend, and I've stayed in touch with him over the years. He's probably the one person I've talked to the most. And of course, I talked to Jim Cantori, but Mike's the one that I talk to the most.
Now, for those that are listening, there's like all sorts of action going on at where she's at, because there's all this noise. It sounds like somebody's constructing a new studio or something.
Oh, well, no, nothing's happening too much like that here, but we have got we do have a new newsroom at Channel 4, which has definitely created a lot of noise in our world, but that's been one of the most fun things that's happened at Channel 4 lately is our brand new newsroom, so we're excited about that. Sorry for the background noise, though.
Yeah, so then you left. So was the reason you left because you wanted to go back into local television, or was there another reason?
The primary reason is I got an opportunity that was really hard to refuse, to work at an NBC station in Raleigh, North Carolina, to be their chief meteorologist there, and it was a great opportunity for me, financially and just position-wise as well. I know it's hard for people to believe this now, but that was 1995. So I worked at the Weather Channel almost 5 years. So it was 1995 I left and went to Raleigh to work at WNCM. And in the mid-90s, there were only a handful of women doing the evening news. Most people, women, did the mornings or they did the weekends. So there weren't that many women doing the evening newscast, doing the weather on the evening newscast. So I seized that opportunity and went to Raleigh. So that's when I left the Weather Channel. But and for a long time, I was the only woman. I was the first woman to ever work in that market, and I was the only woman for a long time.
And when you talk about that, when it was the mid-'90s and there weren't that many women evening meteorologists or even chiefs at the time,
right?
And where we are now, where there's quite a few more, it was the perception then that still could be the case that some people wouldn't trust a woman more than a man. And I don't want to sound bad with that, but
I just think it was it was not a traditional position for a woman, and it didn't hurt. It didn't help the whole period we went through with the weather bunny, so to speak. People may remember that when attractive young women were put on the air to point at maps, but they really didn't know anything about the weather. So a lot of that was trying to overcome that particular kind of picture that had been painted of women doing the weather. But I will tell you, the Weather Channel did a tremendous service to women by having so many women on the air that I think it became more and more acceptable to see them in that evening role. And now they're just, you see women everywhere across the United States in the chief meteorologist role.
Yeah, because I know in my market, where I'm at, there's a few women, but they're, like you said, they're doing the traditional mornings or weekends or whatnot. 'Cause we've not had a woman chief yet. And if I remember, I don't think we've had a woman chief in the state of Iowa yet in any of the markets that I know of. Although I might take that back. I think Sioux City did. But it's becoming more commonplace, especially in the bigger markets. I think smaller markets, it's going to take more time because I think bigger markets, I think it works, like Nashville, St. Louis, places like that. But it's coming.
Yeah, it's just it's slow. I mean, look how long it took to even have women appearing doing the weather in a science role. It took a long time for that to happen, and then it took a long time for any women to do the evening newscast too.
So then, when you went to Raleigh, you were there for what, about almost 10 years?
Not quite. No, I mean, once again, I was there about 5 years.
Okay, 5 years. Okay.
Yeah, it was 5 years that I was in Raleigh, and just a great place to be. Raleigh's beautiful. It's friendly. I'm a Southern girl, so it was an easy adjustment to go to Raleigh.
So when you were in Raleigh, it's not on the coast, but it's close enough that there was quite a few hurricanes that went by. Yeah. Especially in the mid to late 90s.
Right.
So you can talk about those.
We had two in particular that stand out. One was Hurricane Fran, and by the time Fran made it inland, the winds were still hurricane force. I mean, it was weak hurricane, but I believe it was 75 mile per hour winds that were clocked when Fran came through. And it was amazing the destruction that hurricane did to Raleigh. Raleigh is known as the city of oaks. And what had happened, oak trees, and there had been a tremendous amount of rain before Fran came through anyway. So we'd already had some pretty good, nothing record-breaking really, but just as I recall, but just, a lot of rain. So the ground was very saturated. And when those winds came through, trees were down all over Raleigh. And it was devastating to the area, some obviously more than others. I had a tree down in my backyard. Fortunately, it went parallel to my house and did not hit my house, but there were a lot of trees that were down, and roads were impassable. So that's the one that really struck, and that was my first hurricane to actually work in the market where it was coming through, because at the Weather Channel I covered a lot of hurricanes, but I was in Atlanta and not physically where the hurricane was striking. So that was my first one. We'll see if somebody else will get that. But that was my first one that came through. And then let's see, another one was Floyd, and Floyd was an amazing flooding event. And in North Carolina, there's an area of North Carolina we call Down East North Carolina, and that's sort of the eastern part of the state, and that's where the tremendous amount of flooding came through, and it was really terrible. There were several deaths from that flooding that occurred there. So those are the two big ones, the Fran and also the Floyd, and I want to say that the one was 97, one was 99, but I'd have to look for sure. But they were in the mid to late 90s.
Fran was 96, Floyd was 99. That I can remember.
See, all right, I was right in there. I knew Fran was first and Floyd was second.
I know when with the flooding in North Carolina, where you'd have the water, it would just go up the rivers from the ocean, and people, I think a lot of people still even today think, well, if I'm 20, 30 miles inland, I'm not going to get affected by the flooding. But here comes the water, comes backing up into these little inlets, and and those inlets go pretty far.
Yeah, and that was a big problem, and the reason that we had so much trouble, I had never seen anything like it. I mean, there's water standing everywhere, so it was. Some of the flooding was in Raleigh itself, but most of it was towards the east. But our viewership obviously went out that far.
Yeah, so we've talked about a lot of stuff, but we haven't talked about severe weather. Now, when you were in Raleigh, and even when you were back doing the weather in Memphis, when you did severe weather, and we'll get to where you are now in Nashville, did you interrupt for tornado warnings, and did you stay on the air in Memphis, and more specifically in Raleigh? Because when you were in Memphis, it probably was not even commonplace to stay on.
Yeah, it wasn't commonplace. I mean, you did a lot of crawls, and I can remember physically typing in the warnings when I was in Memphis. Now we would do. I do remember cutting into programming, but just nothing like we do now. And Raleigh. We have more severe weather here than we had when I was in Raleigh, but we would cut in and we would stay on and cut into programming, obviously. But of course, get complaints. We did a lot more hurricane, I think, coverage though than we did severe weather coverage when it came to cutting in. But we definitely would cut in during any type of event that was life-threatening to our viewers.
So I assume, and this is pretty much thinking clearly, that you left Raleigh to go home because you wanted to be back in Tennessee.
How did you know that? I sure did. I had 2 children by that time, and I wanted to get closer to my parents, which my parents still live in Jackson. So I wanted to get somewhere. I didn't necessarily want to go back to Memphis. I'd worked in Memphis, but I really loved Nashville. Nashville's just beautiful, and there's a lot of music happening here, and my husband plays music. So I really wanted to get to Nashville. And I just, not that I didn't like Raleigh, because I did. I just had told the lady I was working with at the time, I said, hey, if you ever hear anything coming open in Nashville, let me know. Now, I'm not really looking for a job. I don't really want to go anywhere. But if something in Nashville comes open, let me know, because I would be interested in hearing about it. And that's exactly why I came back, was to get closer to home.
So you ended up being on camera at WSMV in the same position that a certain former person who used to work there, that's now a game show host, worked at.
That's right. Pat Sajak worked at WSMV. He sure did, and did the weather there. And we've done a little bit of remodeling, but there's a picture that hung in a particular place of him for the longest time, Pat, and during the weather. So yeah, he was very, very famous. We also had another iconic figure, not nationally but locally, that worked at WSMV, and that was Bill Hall. And Bill Hall is just a legendary weatherman. He was very groundbreaking. He's African American. Or Bill would always tell me that he preferred to be called Black. But he was very groundbreaking because he began doing weather in the 70s. And for him to be the main weather person at a station as large as WSMV at that time, that was very groundbreaking to be a man of color. And it was just, he was so beloved. I cannot tell you. People still talk about Bill Hall and how much they loved him and trusted him. And he passed away, I want to say 3 years ago, but he was very, very popular. So it was his shoes that I came in to fill, but you really can't fill his shoes. So I just took the time slot where he was working when he retired.
But then it sort of means you go from one groundbreaking person to another.
Yeah.
You're from what you discussed earlier, having a woman in a chief's job in a bigger market, although Raleigh and Nashville are pretty much about the same size.
Yeah, they're the same.
So, but you came in the early 2000s, I think.
Right. I was there. I started in December of 2000, so almost the end of the year. And you may not know this, or you may, but I came not to do the evening shows. When I came, I felt like a little bit was taking a step back because I came to work the morning show. But I did that because there were never any openings in Nashville, and I wanted so desperately to get to Nashville that I decided I'd take a chance and work that morning show in the hopes that maybe someday it might change into something else. And I worked the morning show for 2 years, and then I was moved to the evenings after Bill had decided he wanted to retire.
So there's all this activity that's happened in Nashville since then.
Oh, yeah.
Even beforehand, when they had the tornado before you came in '98.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So before we get into where you are now, do people have the tendency in the market in Nashville, with all the tornadoes that have occurred all the way through, and even when we had the tornado that went through downtown Nashville in '98, do people still treat severe weather seriously, or are they becoming a bit complacent? I don't think they would be, given the fact we've had quite a few tornadoes the last couple of years, especially 2011. But do you see that there could be some complacency coming?
You know what? There are some people that are just there. I just don't think they're going to heed warnings. They're going, they say there's a tornado warning, and they're just not going to react. I think some people do, but I do think that you're onto something. There is a little bit of complacency. A lot of it is because we have so many tornado warnings that are never verified. There's no indication that a tornado actually touched down. So I do think that, unfortunately, that is a little bit of it. But there are a lot of people that do take it very seriously and that do go into their place, particularly anybody that was here in 1998 that knows that a tornado can go right through downtown Nashville. But there have been a lot of other really terrible events that were much more tragic since then.
So we have, for example, you have like the several outbreaks of tornado outbreaks. I know April 27th, 2011 mainly affected middle and eastern Tennessee. And I'm not sure how many of those tornadoes were in your market area. Were there several, or were they more toward Chattanooga and Knoxville?
As I recall from that event, there were some in our area, but that's not one of the big events that that kind of stands out as some of the worst that we've had. There are much more horrific events that for us locally.
Yeah. Yeah, for example, like the '98 when you were still in Raleigh was much worse than April 27th was for Middle Tennessee.
Yeah, I would say so. But there are even, for example, the Super Tuesday outbreak of 2008 was just devastating. There were and I hate to, estimate when I'm talking about deaths and loss of life, but there were over 20 deaths that occurred from that event. And that was a tornado that tracked from the southeast all the way up to the northeast and appeared to lift over Nashville. Really, what we think happened is it encountered some cold air. Is what one of the theories is what happened is it encountered some cold air and kind of dissipated, but reformed on the other side, on the northeast side of Nashville, and that one went right through a rural county called Macon County, and that's where many of the deaths occurred. And it was devastating. There was a gas explosion, a gas plant explosion that happened that you could see for miles around. You could just see the flames, and it happened at night. So that was what was so terrible. There's great video that a young man who's kind of an amateur storm chaser, he was south of Nashville over one of the overpasses looking north, and he was out with his dad. I think he was 14 at the time, so this would have been 2008, and he was looking north, and lightning lit up the sky. Well, he's snapping pictures, and when you see one of the pictures, and I think he even had some video that we froze, you could see what looks like a little funnel where it would have been over downtown Nashville. So that, possibly is what was that storm that started to the southeast and then started to reform on the other side of Nashville. So it's crazy.
And then there's been events in the past couple of years. There was a few tornadoes this past fall, because I know that stuff's on YouTube. I watched that. So when you pretty much would interrupt, and you would stay on, and not. The one thing I did not like there, and this is constructive criticism that I saw on video, is that your tornado warnings are in black. I don't like that. For some reason.
I'm trying to visualize what you're. Oh, you mean the counties are filled in black?
Yeah.
Just an explanation of why we do that is because when you fill them in with the yellows and the reds, it's confusing with the reflectivity that's also on that radar map. And that was the reason for changing it to black, to make it stand out on top of that, and not be confusing with the reflectivity.
Yeah, I figured, because it had to have been something about the colors being too close to reflectivity. Right. But it just looked odd for the fact that I'd never seen that color used before.
Yeah. I don't even know. I remember us starting that, but it's been so long, I can't even remember the entire discussion. But it did have to do with the reflectivity and it being confusing to have that red or yellow, depending on whether it's severe thunderstorm warning or a tornado warning underneath that reflectivity. But that's where it started.
So, for example, for somebody who is not from Nashville and then happened to just see that, and they're used to their colors at wherever they live, the orange or yellow or red, could that confuse people like it did me as to what does black mean? Is that safe? Is that not?
Well, there's no color code that goes with what colors that you're supposed to use, and we verbally say it over and over. Hey, the black filled-in counties mean there's a tornado warning for that county. So that's part of it. Plus, you're crawling it across the bottom of the screen, all the tornado warnings, and usually we're on that. We're zoomed into that warned area. So I mean, perhaps it can be confusing, but honestly, Jeffrey, the first person that's ever said it was confusing, so that's why I wasn't thinking in terms of being confusing.
But I'm not from Nashville, so.
Yeah, it's true.
I've been through Nashville a couple times, but so I'd want to discuss the infamous flood.
Yeah.
When the Cumberland River decided it wanted to expand. and it said, this is being funny, I'm not trying to be. The Cumberland River said, I want to destroy all these buildings because I want new buildings, evidently. Something. That's being kind of snarky, but that was pretty serious when it decided to flood quite a bit of Nashville.
Yes. Historically, it had been the turn of the century, the early 1900s, since we'd had any kind of flood like that. And it's the highest that the river had ever been since the dam system had been put in place. So it was an historic event. It didn't happen in one day, I'll tell you that. It was a rain event that was almost 3 days in duration, and it just rained and rained and rained, what seemed like forever. I mean, we would have breaks, but nothing of any significance. And then as a result, you get the Cumberland River at record levels, and then you have decisions that were made to release water from the dams in some spots, unfortunately based on some old information, and even more people experience the flooding because of that. But one of the saddest things that happened is something I saw happen during Floyd in North Carolina, and that was the people who continued to drive around barricades or drive through water that is rushing over roadways. And we had, I want to say, 30 people in the state die, and most of those died from driving into floodwaters.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, because a lot of people up here compared the flood in Nashville to the flood of 2008 here, which pretty much flooded places like Cedar Rapids, which looked like Venice. Pretty much.
Yeah.
You could take a boat and go down the streets. The water was 8 feet, 9 feet up on the streets. So, and a lot of people here thought that Nashville was pretty much similar. Probably not as bad, because you would have had to flood all of downtown, pretty much all of around the interstate, the loop area. You'd have to have flooded all of that, and that would have been almost impossible.
Well, some of the iconic video that remains from the flood, one would be on Interstate I-24, which goes roughly from Nashville to Chattanooga, and it was flooded in spots, totally flooded, and there is a portable classroom from a school that's near the interstate that's floating down the interstate and crashing into stuff and being torn apart. And that's some of the craziest video that's everybody still looks at from that flood event. I mean, it's just, when you're looking at it in real time, when you were living it, you're like, with your mouth open. You're on TV. I cannot believe what I am seeing. It was just that kind of situation. It was hard to cover because it was happening to you. It was happening to everybody around you. So I hope there's never anything like that again. But that was amazing. And you were talking about the water downtown. There's also pictures of people walking, chest high in the water that's over downtown Nashville streets.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. Because I know the Ryman, I think, got flooded.
Yeah, and then of course the Grand Ole Opry is now held in the Opryland area, and which, for those of you who may not be familiar with the Opryland area, there used to be a theme park called Opryland, and the Grand Ole Opry is in one of the old theaters that was there on that old Opryland location, and now it's the place of the Grand Ole Opry, and that was flooded. It sits along the Cumberland River, and it was totally flooded, whereas, by the way, the Ryman is downtown, which used to be the home of the Grand Ole Opry, and it is occasionally, but most of the time it's out at the Opry House in Opryland. But it was totally flooded and had to be redone, refurbished. That's the Opry House, where the Grand Ole Opry is held at Opryland.
And that's in a bend where the Cumberland kind of goes in a big bend right there, if I remember right.
Yeah, and you know the hotel, a famed Opryland Hotel, sits right there too, and
Yeah.
they had to evacuate guests, and they were very wise to do what they did. They, you know, it was disruptive, but I believe they had 1,500 people in the hotel that they got school buses and evacuated, and that was very wise of them to do that because the hotel flooded.
So that was what, 2010 or 11?
2010, May 1st and 2nd.
Yeah, you'll remember that.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
it's coming on 5 years.
Mhm.
Has things sort of returned to normal at this point, or getting close to it?
I think they're close to it. I mean, there are obviously some people who are in terrible economic situation to start with that probably would say no, I haven't recovered. But for the most part, the city has recovered. There is still some homes that will, you know, that will never be occupied, and the city has actually bought up some areas that probably never should have had housing built there anyway, that were in floodplains. So they've bought up some of those, and those people have fortunately been able to relocate somewhere else because of the money that they received from the government to do that. Also, something that happened because it was like the Army Corps of Engineers and the National Weather Service did not have a really good method of relaying information in a very timely manner, and I think some poor decisions were made because of that, and they've really worked hard to improve that. You know, they're, you know, finger pointing aside, and I really think they've worked very hard to improve that setup because there were some very poor decisions made about releasing water that probably shouldn't have been made. Well, shouldn't have been made.
From upstream and not releasing it from downstream.
Right, right. So areas were flooded because water was released, and you know, shouldn't have been at that time.
Now, compared to the flood that occurred up here, which was in 2008 in the month of June, where all the TV stations in my market went on and stayed on all day, all night, only to take a break in the overnight when nobody would be watching. And they did this for 7-8 days. Did WSMV go on the air during this event and stay on because it was pretty serious?
We did. We did. We were on for days, and um, a big event that was going on that Saturday when the flooding was really getting going was the Kentucky Derby. And this was when it first started, and we tried to be gentle with that, to at least let the race go on. It was like we aired the race, but we covered up the rest of it. And we had some people who were not happy about that. But you know, at that time, people already were being so affected by this. There were people who were dying and people who were in the harm's way. So we kept on the air. We stayed on the air. We tried to do like split screens and things like that to show the race, and then we got back to our coverage. But we were on for days nonstop.
So was that pretty much what you would compare to like a hurricane type event, that you're on, you're focused, and it's like this is happening? It was pretty much similar to what like your time in Raleigh with hurricanes.
Right, it really was, and so much so that we started making out like 12-hour shifts just so people could get a nap. So we would, you know, pair us off and try to swap out people in the weather department just because it was such a long time that we were on the air.
So would that be considered like the biggest event you've probably worked in your entire career, would be the flooding in Nashville? Or would that be somewhat comparable to, say, like the hurricanes when you were in Raleigh?
I think that this probably is the biggest event that I've worked. You know, and that's not to diminish the effects of Fran or Floyd. They were both terrible. but this was just devastating to a lot of people. So, you know, I don't know, maybe it's because it's more recent, but it does seem to me the biggest event that I've ever worked.
Okay, now I'm going to ask some questions that I got from my co-host who's not on. Apparently, according to him, and I haven't looked because I haven't seen this, there's a mascot for winter weather.
That's right.
Yeah, Snowbird.
Mm-hmm.
Who came up with this? That's kind of odd.
Snowbird has been in existence for over 25 years, so it's not anything new. And it was started by a production company here in Nashville. And Snowbird used to be at, I can't remember how many stations they told me at one time, but it was across the country at a lot of TV stations, particularly in the Southeast. And Memphis used to have Snowbird, and there were numerous other cities that had Snowbird, all the same character, the same voice, but they were all based out of this production company in Nashville that created Snowbird. And now we are one of only 3 stations that still have Snowbird. He's extremely popular, and it's mainly a school closing brand. You know, it's the Snowbird School Report. So that's what it is more than anything, is a brand for school closings.
Okay, I was like, because here it's like they only say, here's a sponsor. It's like, okay, whatever. Okay,
So here we'd say, hey, your Snowbird report is sponsored by blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Okay, and my co-host, Mike, also said, and I think I saw this too, that you started a thing to getting air conditioners to people who didn't have them.
Yes, several years back, and I believe that would be 2007 when it was crazy hot here. Yeah. We had one record after another. We had people who were in serious situation. So we started to do a fan drive to get people fans. And then the more we talked with people who were sort of on the front lines, because you always had to kind of hook up with an agency to help you get to the people who need the help because they know who they are. And we were working with the Metro Action Commission, and they said, you know, fans are great, but these people really need an air conditioner. And so heat wave help came out of that need for people to get air conditioners. And so we had a really successful drive that year, and we've brought it back every time we have a really bad situation with heat. Now, we haven't repeated that 2007, anything that bad, but we've used it again since then.
And so, considering the fact that in Nashville, 90 degrees is not hot.
That wouldn't bring out the heat wave help, no.
90 degrees here probably wouldn't bring that out here either.
Yeah.
If we had such a thing. Most things here are fan drives.
Yeah.
Some people do air conditioners once in a while, but I would say if, let's say, the temperature is closing in on 100, yeah, and say the dew points are near 70, that sounds like air conditioner time.
Yes. That was exactly what was going on that summer. It was hot and it was humid. We had temperatures over 100 degrees. And we set some records that year, so it was really one that needed to be addressed, and that was a way that we could use our power as a media entity to help out people who needed it.
It'd be similar to what happened here in Iowa in 2012 when we had our drought, and we had numerous days above 100, which was the first time I could ever remember it being above 100 so many times since the 80s. 88 was a really bad drought year. And so, but the 2012, it was mainly a dry heat.
Yeah.
Dry heat is something Nashvillians don't know about because there's no such thing. It's either warm, or it's extremely humid and hot, or it's just hot. It's not just hot and dry.
It's like we have a back door that we open up to the Gulf of Mexico, and it just flows in all that humidity.
I would think the only time it would probably be hot and dry is if Nashville and most of the South was in a drought. And there's been some nasty droughts down there
Yeah.
once in a while.
We've had a few hot that weren't excessively humid, but it's usually hot and humid.
And when you have hot and humid weather, that typically means thunderstorms. And does that drive you nuts that you don't know it could storm in, say, Franklin, or it could storm in, say, Clarksville or Murfreesboro?
It does. It drives you crazy, you know, especially when you think you can, and somebody who works in television will certainly understand this. You think you can go out to dinner, and then you get caught, and some thunderstorm has fired up, because you know the sun doesn't set till later, so some thunderstorm has fired up before you can get back from getting your burger, and you know here you go again with dealing with a severe thunderstorm warning or something like that.
And does that kind of give you like the, oh, why did I get into this because of that?
Well, you know, sometimes it can be frustrating because your life is weather driven, but I think in the long run it all works out, and you know, I'm glad I do what I do.
Now, when you look in the future, what do you see coming in the future? I'm not talking about like the next 5 days. I'm talking about in the future, next several years. What do you see happening, and what do you hope to see happening?
With weather itself,
weather and broadcast meteorology in a sense, because I think the TV side of it is probably heading toward, it's going downhill, and it's going toward places like this. Hangouts, mobile. People want to know now. They don't want to wait till 10 or 11 o'clock.
You are so right, and that's why all TV stations, well, I shouldn't say all, I'm sure there's some that do not, but many stations like ours, we're on every platform we could possibly be on. We try to be out where people are. We've come up with applications, and you try to serve all those people, because I think we're very realistic, knowing that our audience for sitting down and watching a 5 and 6 o'clock newscast is continuing to dwindle. Even though we have amazing numbers here, I still think that population that does make an appointment to watch the 5 and 6 o'clock news is continuing to shrink. I mean, I have a daughter in high school, I ask her, you know, her friends, some of them they don't watch TV news, so they don't know that I do the weather on TV. And it's a different generation, you know. They're all about their handheld device and staying connected that way and looking up the weather forecast. If you could just only tell them that they could understand that sometimes the app is a computer-driven thing and no human ever looks at it, but you know.
Now, the last question that Mike had, who I might mention that where he is, he's in Bristol, Tennessee.
Oh, Mike's right down the road.
So that he works in radio. He does radio weather over there.
Oh, good.
So, and he had work-related stuff. But anyway, he mentioned that there was a lot of people, a lot of native Tennesseans that don't seemingly get into weather because there's no real big schools that have full-fledged big meteorology departments. Is that kind of concerning that at least you were able to go through it through the geography department at Memphis, but is that concerning that people who want to get into meteorology would have to go to, say, Mississippi State or far away?
It is concerning, because even the program that I went through is no longer there. So that's not even an option. However, there is a new option that has come about. I believe last year was our first year, but the University of Tennessee at Martin has started a meteorology program. So that's very promising and exciting, because before that, really the only place I could tell young people who are interested in meteorology, I could refer them maybe to Western Kentucky because that's just over the state line and not very far, but still they don't get it to take advantage of in-state tuition or help because we have a Hope Scholarship here that's provided by our lottery, and they couldn't take advantage of those things. So I'm excited that University of Tennessee at Martin is now offering that program, and I hope it flourishes. We'll see.
And before I let you go, you did go to AMS and you won an award. So talk about winning that and I'll get it out. Winning that award.
Well, I did. The annual meeting was just held in Phoenix, Arizona, and I received the award for broadcast meteorology, which is one of their annual awards that they give out. And I am just flattered beyond. It's extremely flattering, very rewarding to be honored with that award. But it was primarily acknowledging my years of outreach. And I guess nurturing our viewers during severe weather.
And do you feel like when you're doing the nurturing that you're trying to that you're the calm voice, that you're not going to go screaming and freaking out? Because a lot of people have said that body language will really give hints as to how serious it is, because some people see that.
Yeah, that is true. I will tell you that is the one piece of feedback that I get all the time is I like watching you, Lisa, because you stay calm, you keep me calm, but you tell me what to do. So I think it's important to be calm. There's no, I don't think getting overly excited really helps the situation. So I just try to stay level-headed and calm and relay how serious I think it is, still in a calm voice.
Now, would you be so calm if, say, there was a tornado heading for this TV station?
Well, there actually was an event where I thought the garage door was going to come in, and the hail was pounding so loudly on the roof that I just calmly said that I was moving out of that particular area, but I would keep talking. And so I did move away from the chroma key wall, and so I think I stayed pretty calm, even though that was getting pretty scary because the wind sounded like it was going to tear the door off of the studio. But I haven't had one where I could actually see something coming to our location. So I haven't tested that out yet, but I assure you I would leave the studio if that happened.
Now, the station is on top of a hill.
Yes.
Off of Knob Road, because I've looked it up before.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if I know you have a camera there.
Yes.
I think it might be on the tower. Am I right?
You are right. We do have a tower.
So that's probably one of the highest points, so you'd see it coming.
Yes, yes. So we can see it there. And the way our station is built, we are on a hill, but we do have a basement area. So we have a pretty good spot to get if something does strike on top of our hill. And we've evacuated the building downstairs to the basement. We actually are downstairs. We're not in the basement, but we're downstairs. So we're pretty close to where we need to be.
So I'm trying to think of what else. I know you do a lot with NWA and AMS.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I really have enjoyed being a part of both of those. There's a lot of training that goes on continuously through both AMS and NWA when you go to their conferences, and I think it's really important to stay current on what's happening because it is an ever-changing thing. I mean, weather is constantly changing, new things are coming up all the time. So I do try to stay plugged in to both of those organizations. We have a local chapter of NWA here, which has been fun to be a part of that too, and have some people who are not working but are in the business but are just enthusiasts, which is really fun to be a part of a group that has both working meteorologists and people who are just enthusiastic about the weather.
Now, this would be my last question before we do our shout outs. Given the fact that there's an NWA chapter in, I would say it's in Nashville, probably Middle Tennessee.
Yeah, right.
And the nearest school would be UT Martin.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of an oddity to have NWA chapters that are not connected to a school per se?
Yeah, it is kind of odd, but one of the folks at the National Weather Service decided that we needed one, and so I said, I think we do too, and so we got together, and that's how it got formed.
Because I'd mentioned this, but there used to be an NWA chapter where I live in eastern Iowa, and it was eastern Iowa and western Illinois, and it pretty much disbanded because everybody lost interest.
Oh gosh.
That was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
That it went away. So, and there's been some talk about that. When I had one of our former guests who works in the Quad Cities talked about it, we talked about it off camera, and I was thinking, well, why don't we have this again? We should start looking at it again. So, but anyway, so
well, get some good speakers to come and talk to your group, and then you'll get the interest going.
Yeah, we'll see. Because the one in Central Iowa,
yeah,
in Des Moines, is a very good chapter. Their chapter's gone for a long time.
Yeah,
more or less because we've had a guest on who works with that chapter, but.
Mm-hmm.
But so we're going to do our shout-outs now. This is where we shout out anything that could be weather-related, could not be weather-related, and whatnot. Now let Lisa wait a little bit before she has to figure out if she has to go and use her pictures from her trip to Nicaragua. So I'm going to shout out now I have to figure out what I have to shout out. I hate when I don't know what I'm trying to shout out. I'll shout out the new GFS, which finally went operational. It had been in this kind of experimental stage for a while, the new GFS. It started on Wednesday with the 12Z run. Mm-hmm. And the best thing I like about it is it's in 3-hour increments up to 240 hours. So now we can not know what the weather is going to be at hour 237. So I'll shout that out. Even though it's 20 minutes later than normal, and I don't like that.
Is it my turn? Am I supposed to shout out something now?
Shout out whatever. You can shout out your the weather people, all the people that work there. You can shout out your competitors.
Well, first thing I have to shout out is I'm loving the weekend forecast, so a big shout out for sunshine and some 50s for a change, because we were in the deep freeze there for a little while. So that's my first big shout out, is a great weekend forecast.
Yeah, a deep freeze for you is like 30.
I know, it's all relative.
Well, which is interesting, and you got me back onto another topic that last year, where there was all that snow problems in Alabama and Georgia. In Tennessee, it didn't last year. In Tennessee last winter, you had below zero temperatures.
Yeah, we had a terribly cold winter last year, record-setting winter. Kind of individual little records that were set. Wasn't the coldest winter we've ever had, but we hardly got any snow. So cold, but no snow.
And it was like 0 or even below 0 on some nights?
Yeah. We had 2 below, and it was cold for us. I know it's relative.
Well, and the interesting thing about that was that, because I saw below 0 temperatures all the way into Alabama, which was a little odd. Yeah. But at the same time here, I think, if I remember, and I'd remember, because I looked back about a week ago, back to January of last year, thinking, this cold snap we had last week, I'm thinking, oh no, it's last year all over again. And I looked back. We had, at least in the nearest reporting station to me, there's a bunch of them, but the one I trust, the one in Cedar Rapids, 20 miles away, of the 31 days in January last year, 2014, 18 of them were below 0 for low. And I think so far this year, it's the 16th day. Of course, it wasn't below 0 today. I think we're at like 5 or 6. So, unless it gets cold soon, I'll shout out no cold weather, please. I mean, unfortunately, I don't see that not lasting. But I would also mention before I get to we finish this out because you've been on for a little over an hour that I was talking with our garden person today who lives in Des Moines, and he said his crocuses are coming up.
Ooh.
So I'm thinking, and he's a garden person, so he's not concerned, but he told me that it was a little odd for them to be coming up this early.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody that has their plants coming out, especially in the northern states, especially in the areas that were in the 50s and 60s, you have to be careful that those plants are not going to make it through all of the January and February if it's going to stay this cold. Because I'll mention now, the last typical freeze in Iowa is around May 1st. It won't be May 1st for 3.5 months. So don't expect your flowers to make it to May 1st.
No.
So, and we've even had snow. We've had major snowstorms in May. 2 years ago, northern Iowa had a foot of snow on the 1st of May, which had never happened, at least in my lifetime. It happened in the 40s, but so.
You can keep that. I don't want that.
Oh, we've had. I've seen snow in the months of October, November, December, January, February, March, April, and May. That's 8 months I've seen snow. And I'm only in my mid-30s. I want to see snow on my birthday, and that's in September. So, but I've had frost on the ground, covering the whole ground, making the ground go completely white on my birthday. And that was the earliest frost that had ever occurred, which was on my birthday, which is the 15th of September. And I was like, well, if it's cold on the 15th of September, what is it going to be like on, like, Christmas? So, but that was many years ago. So I thank you for taking your time today, Lisa, since you're busy with stuff. But anyway, next week on our show, Chad Sandwell from KMEG in Sioux City will be on. And then we have a bunch of people that are a bunch of empty dates that we'd like to work out. And then I wish I had my list up in front of me so I'd know. Gosh, who was it? Fred Gossage from WBRC in Birmingham will be on. That's a Thursday show. That's February 19th. And then Nathan Parker from Weatherbug is back again. He decided he wanted to come back, evidently. That's on Friday, February 27th. And then I'm still working on getting that show, I'll get it out. We have a guest sort of tentatively scheduled for the end of March. I'm going to try and book that in. But so if we have nothing else, we can end the show tonight. So thank you, Lisa, for joining us. You can always join us again if there's been another flood or a tornado or something.
All right. Well, thank you for asking me. It's been fun.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Okay.
And I thank everybody for watching. We'll see you next Friday. Have a great weekend, and God bless.